Hi, everyone. Welcome to this interview with Jessica Fern. My name is Noor. I'm the founder of Love Addicts. We're a community of people with anxious attachment. And I have with me here today Jessica. Jessica is a public speaker. She's a psychotherapist, and she's the author of best-selling book Polysecure. So, Jessica, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to talk to you today.
Thank you, Noor. I'm excited to be here with you.
Awesome. So Jessica, I mean, there's a lot to talk about today. I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of things to cover when it comes to attachment, when it comes to relationship. But before we dive right into anything, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, what's your background? What's your story? How did you get here? What got you to write your books?
Yeah. It's probably a convoluted story, right? A multi-layered story. I've always had a love for psychology. Actually, it was in high school. I think I was in 10th grade, and it was the first time we could really choose an elective. And there was a psychology elective, which seems very rare.
Yeah,
And it was the first time I remember like coming online academically, like with interest and just like, oh, you know. So I think from that point forward, it just always was like a passion and a love, And then I've studied so many different things from international conflict resolution and, family mediation and narrative therapy and
mhm,
attachment theory and trauma therapy,
mhm.
that it's just continued through the years, and all different modalities of sort of self help and spirituality as well.
Nice. Yeah, it always
Yeah. And
leads into spirituality somehow as well, whenever you put in
yeah.
work.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Right. Because it is, you sort of dive into it, and the line between psychology and spirituality do start to blur.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now you've become a relationship expert as well and trauma
Mhm.
expert. You've written the book Polysecure on
Yeah.
polyamory and attachment and how it all ties in together. So, when it comes to attachment, how would you define, for example, anxious attachment to someone who
Yeah.
is struggling with that or someone who is, dealing with it in some simple terms? How would you describe how they feel?
Yeah. I would describe it as having a preoccupation with the relationship or relationships they feel anxious about, a preoccupation with the other. What's
Mhm.
the other doing? Where are they? How are they? And what does that then mean about me? Am I okay? How am I? Who am I? Right. But this real external preoccupation and anxiety about, you know, how well the relationship is going. Are my needs getting met? Can I get them met? Am I valued? Am I going to be rejected? There's a lot of that sort of swarming. And I think um how do they feel is a lot of that swarming. Like there's a lot of stuff going on inside, right? A lot of like spinning of the wheels and feeling dysregulated and
Yeah.
feeling that sense of, not grounded and feeling very anxious.
Right. So in a way, it's like your nervous system or your attachment system is very activated and
Yeah, right.
hyperactivated.
Exactly. It's the hyperactivated attachment system instead of the attachment system, which it can be deactivated in the
Mhm.
avoidant dismissive attachment
Mhm.
or just feeling at ease in secure
Mhm.
attachment.
Got
Right.
it. And so when it comes to like anxious attachment, what do you think is attributed to the person's own trauma or own coping strategy, and what is attributed to the relationship itself and the person they're dating?
It's a great question, and it's usually both. Right? And I think when we're feeling sort of an anxious flare up, right? I call them sort of episodes or flare ups, right? Is to question, okay, what if this is mine? What if this is my history, my traumas, right? My attachment experiences with people before this relationship, where there might be open wounds that just got activated, or old wounds that just got triggered. There might be projection happening onto my partner, or a lot of assumptions that I'm making about, what's going on with them.
Yeah.
But then there's a lot of times too where people just take too much blame, right?
Mm.
They come to me and, oh, it's my anxious attachment. And then they describe the situation. And I'm like, I would be pretty upset too, if that's what I was experiencing, right?
Yeah.
Where our partner might not be showing up with the level of attunement or respect or
Mm.
consideration or availability that we really need to feel like we're in a baseline healthy relationship.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
it's
really, mm.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, it's really like a mixture of both. It's like the person's own, like what they're dealing with and the relationship itself, and they kind of intertwine, and there's like a dynamic that happens.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard in that moment when we're feeling activated to sort through all of that, right? What's my stuff from the past? What's my attachment wounds getting reactivated versus what did my partner do that actually really is painful to me,
Mm.
right?
Right,
That needs to be addressed. It's not just an attachment problem of
right.
mine.
Yeah, it's a lot of things happening at the same time. And so like
Exactly.
when someone comes to you and they're telling you like my attachment system is activated, I'm feeling very anxious, preoccupied, this happened in my relationship, how would you guide that person to sort between what's really going on from the relationship and what they need to work on?
Yeah, so I'll work with the anxious attachment as a part of them. What parts of you, or multiple parts, what parts of you are feeling anxious,
Hmm.
right? And then doing inner parts work so that those parts can be healed or settled, right? That they can get the soothing that they need from self, right?
Hmm.
And that's a beautiful process and an ongoing one, right? That doesn't happen in one session.
Yeah, of course.
Right. But where someone starts to identify, oh, this isn't all of me,
Hmm.
right? And I can actually create some space between me and my anxious parts, and I can tend to my anxious parts.
Hmm.
That's a huge developmental capacity for
Hmm.
someone to have, right? So that's one thing, right? And then usually a lot of affirming, hearing about the relationship and affirming like what's not just anxious attachment, but what's actually valid, to be concerned about, to be upset about, and then how to address it.
Right.
What boundaries do you need? What requests do you need to make? What kind of conversations need to happen? So, really helping people get clarity
Hmm.
on what they want, what they would like, and how to bring that to their partner.
Right. I love what you said about like looking at anxious attachment as being part of us,
Yeah,
all of us. Like it's something we're experiencing, not something that we are.
exactly. Yeah. Don't take anxious attachment on as like an identity label,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Or a static identity label, especially,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus part that needs support, And so usually the other thing with anxious attachment is really learning regulation skills,
Hmm.
right? How you get so dysregulated. So learning how to regulate one's nervous system.
Hmm.
So that would be another component that I really love to point, to share with people to teach them those skills.
Hmm.
And then, polyvagal theory is just such an amazing resource for
Hmm.
that. How to know what nervous system state am I in and what interventions do I need to do
Right.
to get back into, a homeostasis place.
Yeah. Could
Yeah.
you maybe like expand on that a little bit? Like for someone who's watching and they're struggling with
Yeah.
anxious attachment and they get hyperactivated when something triggers them, um, like how could they apply this maybe in little tips? How could they apply this in order to regulate their emotions and
Yeah. So
okay.
I first lay out with people the spectrum of being in that sympathetic fight or flight activation, right? That's where we feel the rush of stress hormones and adrenaline, and we feel dysregulated emotionally. We're reacting, right? We might feel a lot of the physiological signs of feeling our heart rate increase, or the flush of heat, right? Or shaking. So, first, just saying, what's your spectrum of 0 to 10, 0 not dysregulated at all and 10 completely dysregulated.
Right.
And first starting to say, what does, your yellow, orange, and red zone look like? And
Hmm.
that's different for everybody, right? And so just breaking that down. So people listening to this start to think, what are the early signs of dysregulation? Maybe it's your thoughts start to, speed up, or you start arguing with someone in your head, or you start fidgeting and fussing and, biting your nails, right? Maybe your orange zone is you start to like feel tension in your body, or you can't concentrate with emails, or you start to avoid texts, right? And then what's your red zone look like, right? It might be a complete flight looking response, or a fight, or a meltdown, right? So just getting our sense of that, and then what in each of these zones work as actual strategies and interventions, right? So in our yellow zone, when we start to catch, oh, I'm getting dysregulated, something like breath work will really work, right? Where you are calming down your body. You're making sure that you're like inhaling to the count of 4 and exhaling out of your mouth to the count of 7, right? That longer exhale signals the body, oh, I'm not actually in stress. I'm actually okay, right? But breath work isn't going to work if you're in your red zone. At that point, you're so dysregulated. You need to usually like really get like a release of those stress hormones. You need to be physically get it out of your body, right? In different kind of ways.
Hmm.
So just that process of learning, like when do positive affirmations work versus they're not going to work at all because you're just too dysregulated. You can't reframe this. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a lot of self-awareness then, like, being aware of where you are in the moment, where you are, what you are feeling, and then having some sort of intervention, like an if-then kind of rule. So if I'm feeling
Exactly.
this,
Right. Like a flow chart for yourself, right? And for the anxious style, one of the hardest things to do is to take a break from their partner and say, I'm dysregulated. I need to go run around the block, or I need to go sit in my room and journal for 20 minutes, and let the stress hormones dissipate. Like that separation brings up more anxiety when usually that's what someone needs the most.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Is to take a break and then I'll come back. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then the other option is in when we have the right partnership, we can co-regulate,
Mm,
right? So we can start to say, oh, I'm getting triggered and dysregulated. And a partner can come over and say, put their hand on your back and say, okay, like, what do you need right now? Let's pause the conversation. Let's get your nervous system back to baseline.
right.
And that's hard when both people are triggered. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the relationship and like having someone you can co-regulate with can be a game changer for someone with anxious
Game
attachment.
changer. Yeah, total game changer in
Yeah.
the moment. And honestly, healing a lot of those past wounds too, right? Because that anxious style arises like, oh, when I was upset, the person wasn't consistent. They weren't showing up with like this warm, caring posture towards me, right? In the way I needed. Yeah.
Yeah. And that brings the thought that one thing that we humans tend to do a lot is we tend to look for familiar relationships.
Yes.
So we tend to fall back into that pattern sometimes, and we might find ourselves with a partner who's triggering us quite a lot or who's unable to help us co-regulate.
Yeah.
What can we do in that case? Like if we're with a partner who has been triggering our attachment system.
Yeah. Right. There's sort of this like threshold, I think, that I don't think we ever cannot get triggered in relationship, right? I've yet to see that. I don't think that's the right expectation to have. But is when I'm getting triggered, the way my partner acting actually re-traumatizing,
Right.
reinforcing, and actually creating new wounds versus they're triggering the old wounds, but then in relationship, we can work through it together.
Right.
Right? That would be the difference. To have a partner that can process through it with you, that will do conflict resolution, that will repair with you, right? Instead of actually creating re-injuries.
Yeah. So you'd say
Yeah.
that it's really important for someone with anxious attachment or even really any attachments
Any person. Yeah.
to look for someone who they could have that relationship with as well, someone who could work
Yeah, I think
there.
right. Our standard in partnership ideally would be conversations where you say, how do we want to deal with conflict together? It's inevitable, right? How do we want to deal with when we're triggered together? Like, can we be caring and kind to each other in the moments that are the hardest?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Is that a value in the relationship?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And we should look for it. And so, a lot of what we're saying also kind of points to the concept that relationships can help us heal. And when
Yeah.
we're together with someone who does share that value with us of wanting to work on things, repair, wanting to co-regulate with us, support us when we're in that moment, it's really helpful and it could really help us heal what we've been through. But
Absolutely.
for the people who don't have a relationship at the
Yeah.
moment, they're single, what can they do to work on this for themselves? And do they really need a partner at the moment to work?
Right. Well, I'd say even if they're romantically or sexually single, they're probably still in relationships that matter, right? And so that in other kinds of more platonic relationships, or other attachment-based relationships that aren't romantic or sexual. There's a lot of healing that can come from that, like knowing that you matter in people's lives and make a difference and you're valued, right? But individually, it is sort of what I've already said of looking at, okay, what are the parts of me that need to be healed and doing that inner work.
Right.
Yeah.
In your book, I remember one thing that really stuck with me was becoming your own secure base in some
Yeah.
situations. Do you
Yeah.
think you could tell people more about that? Like, how can they become their own secure base and be able to depend on themselves in that way?
Yeah. So some of it is, having the experience of there's more of a self than just the past and just the trauma and just the hurts, right? And really having the experience of this bigger self, right? That really can hold the rest of you.
Yeah.
And that is quite transformative. And whether you do that through journaling, through, medicine assisted MDMA kind of journeys, do it through therapy with someone, like there's many ways, meditation, there's many ways and doorways into that experience.
Hmm.
But feeling like there is more to me than that, right?
Right. So it's a
Yeah.
lot about like changing the beliefs you have about yourself, about people.
Yeah. And accessing an inner sense of stability, right? Which some people do need support to get there, but I've yet to actually meet someone that hasn't gotten there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's always like the,
Wanting that. Right.
yeah, we
Yeah.
always like that. Hmm.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And so like with when it comes to having this sense of inner stability, that's a really nice feeling to have and a really nice like realization for someone to be
Yeah.
able to get to. Do you think that there are some beliefs that people could develop in themselves, about the world that could help them get there? Because a lot of the anxious attachment has to do with like having some
Catastrophe.
beliefs. Yeah. So
Yeah. A lot of, right. A lot of catastrophizing, a lot of assuming the worst.
mhm,
Right.
mhm.
So beliefs that presence you in the moment, right? In this moment, I'm struggling, but I might not be struggling every single moment, right? Or this moment too shall pass. I mean, a lot of people find help in
Yeah.
that phrasing and that belief, right? Or it's become more popular where they say like put an N, a yet, the word yet, like I haven't gotten there yet, at the end of certain beliefs to even support you and going, okay, realizing I'm a work in progress,
Yeah.
right? So working on the beliefs too around more of a growth mindset instead of a fixed static mindset, people can look that up. There's a lot of helpful tools around that.
Right. So it's a lot about seeing the world in the sense of it's like a playground. You can learn, you can grow, you know.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And, getting to the place where you can feel like I can handle this. I might be struggling, but I'm fundamentally okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really about that I'm okay if this happens kind of belief that really manifests into everything else.
Yeah, yeah, and getting this space again with parts that overwhelm us, because when we have really overwhelming big feelings or parts that get really extreme, we need to create some space so there is this sense of agency with that. Like, okay, this part might be here and it wants to overwhelm me, but I know what to do so that it doesn't.
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So feeling that there's more of that secure self in the driver's seat. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a lot about like also taking the beliefs and finding some evidence in the world or in
That's
ourselves in order to reinforce them.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. Right. And usually, when there's lots of negative beliefs, you can even already find in your life the counter examples to that where it might exist, maybe in a different area of life, but it exists.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I think a lot of people try to develop beliefs in themselves, like that they are lovable, they are
Yeah.
valued, like they are worthy, which is something really important for anxious attachment. But sometimes they would have the counter beliefs, like, their brain would tell them, you're not really lovable, you're not really
Yeah.
worthy. What can you do to develop those?
Yeah. So that's working on the inner critic part,
Mhm.
and seeing, oh, that's a voice within me that says these things. It beats me up. It's kind of a bully, right? And it came though from valid experiences. And usually that inner critic voice is actually a protector part that wants us to do well or to look well or to achieve or to have love, right? But its method, the intention is good, but its method, is usually through criticism, blaming, and shaming.
Right.
And that can be transformed. Yeah, that can shift.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Is-
So that the part of, I talk about my next book actually is going to get in more into the inner critic. And my sort of way of working with it is how do we change that voice more into an inner coach?
Hmm.
Right. So that still like catches me when I, veer out of my lane a bit or drop the ball over here. Right. We still want that sort of internal accountability, but an inner coach is going to point out the maybe where I'm falling short, but then encourage me to do better.
Yeah.
Where the inner critic just points out where you're falling short and then paralyzes you with feeling awful about yourself.
Yeah.
And usually doesn't help you actually, show up better.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's a good way to put it. I would say like being able to be your coach and kind of like help yourself rather than always be a critic is a good thing to be aware of as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when it comes to, relationships, I'm really curious about like someone who has put in the work and they've kind of like been working on their anxious attachment. I think a lot of the times there's still some aspects of that in us that don't completely go away. So one question I get asked is how can someone know that they are ready for a relationship with someone, a romantic one, and not necessarily going into a relationship just because they're seeking to calm down their anxious attachment or fill in an emptiness?
Right. That's a great question. I think, using the discernment if I'm moving towards this person, kind of just what you said, like to fill a gap, to fulfill, a certain hole I think I have, to make myself feel better,
Mhm.
versus am I moving towards this person because I'm genuinely interested in them?
Yeah.
I feel like the connection with them is strong and like there's a sense of, expansion,
Mm.
right? Versus this sense of grasping, right?
Mm.
Or, oh no.
Right.
Or, a sense of desperation that we can feel. So, like, yeah, what are the feelings guiding moving towards the other person
Yeah.
would be probably the way to assess. Yeah.
Right. And one question about maybe what you're working on in your books is I think polyamory can teach us a little bit about that as well. Like
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
Polyamory can teach us a lot, yeah, about relationships. And I think what you're getting at with this question is in polyamory, if we have sort of the option and choice of more than one partner, we don't just have to be with someone because we are obliged to them or there's no one else, right? So there can be more of that discernment and choice, right? I'm with you because I'm choosing to be with you versus I feel like I have to be with you.
Right.
Yeah.
How can you transfer that to monogamy?
Yeah. Ideally, just have that as your standard too. Right? Like it's okay to be exclusive and monogamous,
Yeah.
but don't, choose a partner because it's like, oh, I don't think there's anyone better out there for me. Or, how would you feel if that's how someone chose you? Right? So, right, choose, if you're going to do monogamy or anything, any relationship structure, be with people because you really want to be, you admire them, you appreciate them. There's that mutual sense of value
Hmm. And it
in
all
each
really,
other's lives.
yeah, cool. And I was gonna say it all really comes down to you being your secure base because then that gives you the power to and power in yourself, of course, to be able to choose the person that you want rather than
Yeah.
choose out of scarcity.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very, very interesting. And
Hmm.
the flip side of that is someone who already is in a relationship. They might be thinking, well, am I staying in this relationship because I really like this person, or am I staying in this relationship because I'm afraid to be alone? Like
Yeah.
someone who's in that situation, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. So, well, to really sort through that question, and if the answer is I am just with this person because I don't want to be alone. Um, Helping them be okay with being alone, for one, right? Not being so afraid of being alone. And then see what happens. Sometimes that opens up new things, and like you're like, oh, maybe I do actually like this person. But also bringing in some of like your own, morals around how would you feel if the tables were turned and someone was just with you because they didn't want to be alone,
Right.
right? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And there are versions of sort of companion marriages, but they usually get along and really enjoy each other's company, but there might not be as much of a romantic or sexual component to that relationship. But usually they do enjoy each other, right? So if you're really not enjoying the person you're with, you just don't want to be alone, really want to look at, yeah, what's going on here on a deeper level. Yeah,
Right.
and support them and sort of not staying in that kind of situation.
Yeah. It does
Yeah.
require a lot of awareness and a lot of empathy, like you said as well.
Yeah, it's true. And it can take time,
Mm.
right? Some of these things aren't quick things to realize or quick fixes to go through.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And when someone goes through a breakup, then do you have any advice for them on how to deal with that? If it's been something that's been, specifically if someone's been in an anxious relationship where
Mhm.
they felt very triggered and then now they broke up and, there's all the feelings of confusion and fear.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Yeah. I have like a lot of little breakup protocols I'll do with
Okay.
clients, you
Okay.
know, and some of it is the narrative of what happened and why is really important. And sometimes that takes like a while to actually feel a sense of like, oh, this narrative satisfies me,
Yeah.
right? And the narrative ideally wouldn't be it's all their fault or it's all my fault,
Hmm.
right? But a narrative that's like, oh, these are the things that happened and this was that was their responsibility and this was my part and my responsibility. So even just sorting through that,
Yeah.
like what were the things that were my responsibility
Mhm.
in this that ended things and what was not mine and actually was theirs, ways they didn't show up or ways they didn't follow through, right? And then looking at, okay, is this a repeating pattern for me, and then why, right? So at some point when you're ready, the lessons learned is really important. The takeaways of, okay, what was my pattern in here and where did that come from? And how can I not keep repeating that to the same degree? We always have like a similarness of that pattern usually, but not to the same painful degree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I find too, so, coming up with a coherent narrative of what happened and then having ways to process grief and anger and hurt.
Hmm.
Yeah, is important.
Okay. Could you
Yeah.
expand on that a little bit? Like, what are some ways that people can process grief?
Yeah, so it might be with others, right? Just having friends, loved ones that can, be with you in your grief and your sadness. Sometimes, though, you're not with anyone in the moment that you feel the grief. So just allowing it and knowing it can come in waves throughout time and different weird moments, even, inconvenient moments, right?
Yeah.
But I'll usually support people in journaling, just writing out everything that you feel is like grief, or maybe it's anger. Usually there's a lot of anger that needs to just like get out and not sort of stay pressurized internally. And journaling that out, and then even doing some kind of ritual where you burn the papers that you wrote on, and you release it in some way, or there's a symbolism to like, I'm letting go of this. When you're ready, though, it's not immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. But sometimes it's like, go to a rage room, like get it out that way. There's grief retreats where you can go be with others, and there's specific ways that they do grieving that, people find really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like it's a lot of working on releasing your grief in a healthy way. So not taking it,
Exactly.
suppressing it.
Right. Exactly. Not suppressing it, but then also not like, drowning in it. It's a hard balance.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And when it comes to breakups when it comes to anxious attached people in general, a tendency for anxious and avoidant people to sort of be together and then break
Yeah.
up. And
Yeah.
oftentimes the breakup tends to be very confusing for both parties, but for the anxious person, it tends to be that, they feel like they've tried really hard and things just would never work. So
Yeah.
how could you maybe explain to someone how that breakup happens? And, of course, every situation is different, but if someone is going through a breakup like that, what can they do to have clarity and to find closure in that breakup?
Yeah. Right. Because they might not have closure with the person. Right. I
Mhm.
mean, there's the sort of this uncoupling movement that's, I think, been great of how to do conscious decoupling or uncoupling. And if you can do that with your partner, that's incredible, right? Where you can say thank you for what you got. You can say what your pains were or what you're letting go of, and like sort of lovingly part, right? So if that's an option, that's ideal. But when it's not, right, and sometimes you're talking about with the anxious avoidant, the avoidant will have a tendency to stop communicating, maybe ghost, maybe disappear, right? Like just drop, and the person feels really alone in their breakup, or it's like a sever that's very sudden. Yeah, so it's just making sense of what happened, again, what wasn't yours, what are their behaviors, right? And that it's sometimes not even personal. Like this is how they don't have the capacity to deal with these difficult conversations, right? And that's usually why the relationship's ending. Right? So they didn't have the capacity to be kind or considerate, usually in the ending either.
Mm.
Yeah, and that has nothing to do with you, is an
Right.
important thing to realize. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
understanding that it's really not just you that has maybe sabotaged.
Mess things up or been too needy or sabotage things. It's like, yeah, they're what you were drawn to someone, and it's not always from the beginning though, but sometimes we're drawn to someone who can't really show up. That's part of the pattern. But sometimes things change, and we did have a secure relationship where a person was really available for years, and then something changes and then they're not, and they stop participating in the relationship. And to see that it's unfortunate, but we can't blame ourselves for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in a way, like at some point we have to accept that this dynamic just does not work for us anymore and we have to part
Yeah,
ways. And
exactly.
yeah. And so when parting ways, like part of this process is trying to imagine a future without this person, trying to accept that this person is no longer with us. And that's like a big loss. It's like something that is not easy to comprehend and reconcile in our brains. And
Yeah.
do you like have any protocols or advice for someone who is trying to accept that this person is no longer in their future and maybe just let
Mm,
go of them?
a great question. I mean, I think it is just what you're saying is sort of allowing that to be true, right? Because there can be this resistance, like, I don't even want to allow that to be true, but actually accepting, like, as of right now, this person isn't, most likely isn't going to be in your future, and you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
There's grieving of the future that you imagined and wished for. That is a loss, right? And there is a death of the relationship. So just really the acceptance and allowance of that, and the pain will heal. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And often most people do move on, and they find new wonderful relationships or things in life, right?
Yeah.
Like you'll move on, and there still will be wonderful things about life and relationships.
Yeah. It's having
Yeah,
that. Sorry, go ahead.
not thinking this is the only person on the planet for me that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's having that like capacity to see an alternative, see a better future. Uh,
Yeah, right. And sometimes it takes time to get there, but like there could be a better future. And sometimes we don't know until months or years or decades later that it was actually really for the better that that relationship
right.
moved on. And yeah.
Right. What do you think polyamorous breakups can teach us about monogamous breakups?
Hmm. It's interesting. I'm trying to think if like how fundamentally different they are, right? I mean, in many ways, I think a breakup can just be a breakup.
Mhm.
And it can be confusing though in polyamory, because on one hand, you might have more support because you have other partners that are there to support you. And then, yet, also because of that, some people don't take the breakup as seriously because they're like, well, you have two other partners. So what's the problem?
Right.
Right. So there can be this. But I think one thing that polyamory embraces a bit more is relationship transitions,
Okay.
and that there can be an escalating or a de escalating of relationships. And that's not a bad thing. And I think polyamory has more narratives around the ending of a relationship, even doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's not a failure
Mm.
that the relationship is ending. It could be quite a successful relationship and then it ended when it needed to end. And that's okay.
Mm.
Right. So I think polyamory has a almost a more forgiving view on breakups.
Right.
Yeah, that it's not so much a failure or a personal failure. Um, and probably holds more hope that, there's other connections out there too.
Yeah. It in a
Yeah.
way it embraces the impermanence of
Yeah.
everything, including relationships, and offers an alternative to us as well.
Yeah, exactly. And one of you could say the tenets of polyamory is really trying to embrace not possessing other humans. Right? And that comes with like, oh, right, the freedom for the other person to be who they are, which might mean we're not always together.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
you know, taking that into someone in a monogamous relationship as well, embracing that things are impermanent, embracing that, you can enjoy your partner and that you can allow for things to just happen is also can be quite helpful, something to learn from that as well.
Yeah, right. That we're committed to growing and evolving together, and hopefully it's forever, but it might not be.
Yeah.
And that can be okay.
Yeah. Do you think anxiously attached people can be in different types of relationship than monogamy? So can someone who is anxious
Yeah.
can
Yeah. I mean, I
secure?
think every style of attachment is in all the different structures. Yes.
Hmm.
Of course,
Okay.
is it harder? Probably, yeah. I mean, any insecure style in non-monogamy is going to struggle a little bit more or a
Hmm.
lot a bit more because the structure of polyamory non-monogamy is sort of less secure on
Hmm.
in some ways, not every way, than the stronger structure of monogamy. If I know what this is, it's culturally, societally supported and accepted. There's the rules of engagement, whereas yeah, polyamory is less secure in that way.
Right.
And so it can bring up more anxiety for people. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But when you sort of shift into that, but wait, we're in choice and I'm choosing you, and we can learn how to support the anxiousness that comes up in ways that actually build a secure foundation.
Hmm.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can someone who's anxiously attached, who's, trying to figure out what they want in relationships, what they want in a partner, how can they figure out what's healthiest for them? Is it like something, or what they want even? Is it a monogamous relationship? Is it, they want to take some time to date? Do they want a polyamorous relationship? Like, how can,
Yeah. All of the above. Yeah. I mean, if you're single and you start dating and just feeling into what are those experiences like, where do you feel most comfortable and expansive and excited, in within the different structures when you feel triggered, why is that? I mean, there's many people who initially are repulsed by non-monogamy and terrified of it, and they do a lot of inner work and then they realize it's something they actually want and love. So it's, the beginning of how you feel isn't always an indication of where you'll wind up.
it's a lot about
Yeah.
sitting with the feelings.
Yeah, exactly. Working through the layers of what is this triggering, or what are the fears here? What is the monogamous conditioning, about okayness, worthiness, relationships, all of that stuff, gender dynamics.
Cool. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
circling back to partnerships and relationships, like when it comes to anxiously attached people, I think polyamory can open up a lot of doors for, exploring different parts of yourself with different people. And one pairing that we also mentioned before that tends to happen is an anxious person might attract an avoidant person. They kind of
Yeah.
work with each other. Maybe it's familiar to them, maybe similar patterns, but do you think that relationship can work? Do you think that those two pairings can end up securely attached together?
Absolutely. As long as both people are willing to put in the work to
Hmm.
not be in that dynamic. So that the more anxiously inclined person learns how to soothe themselves, right? Learns how to speak in ways that don't come off as criticism, right?
Yeah,
And learn how to lean back just a little bit and
yeah,
give their partner space to actually come towards them,
yeah.
and that the more avoidantly attached style, that person learns how to lean in,
Hmm.
to reveal themselves, to be vulnerable,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So I've definitely seen it work. I have many clients, that's the most common pairing that comes, for support. But it really requires both people willing to do the work. If you have the anxiously attached person who's the one reading all the books, doing all the emotional labor, let's do this, let's try this, listening to the podcast, and your partner's not participating in that way, like you can't carry the weight of their healing,
Right. Hmm.
or their inner work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot about a partnership, like working together as a team, figuring out things together rather than one person doing.
Exactly, right. And this is my tendency, so I have to take responsibility for it.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah.
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 And one thing that also comes to mind when it comes to an anxious avoidant pairing is typically someone, with an anxious attachment style would have a set of needs that are typical of that attachment style. So kind of they desire closeness, they want
Yep.
intimacy, they want to, be close to the person. And then
Exactly.
someone with an avoidant attachment style typically might have less of those needs. So they desire a little bit more space. They don't
They
want
want freedom.
freedom,
Yep.
independence, and those needs might clash. So an anxious person might want a lot of communication and physical affection, whereas the avoidant person might find that overwhelming and they want a little bit of space and distance. How could you reconcile that in a relationship or in that pairing? Like this
Yeah.
out of balance of different needs.
Yeah. It's right on the surface, they can look like they're clashing, right? And it can feel like that in the moment. But really, both people seeing how they have both of those needs for connection and freedom, and almost this negotiation. Okay, so how does each of us enjoy connecting? What does that look like? What's the frequency that's enough? Right. And then also with freedom, what does personal space and autonomy look like, or freedom of choice in the relationship?
Yeah.
So I think just really defining that and making sure there's enough compatibility, right?
Yeah.
Because, sometimes you are too far apart,
Yeah.
you know, and it just might not work, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of a pairing where his idea was that he should see a partner every single day. And for her ideal was 3 to 4 times a week.
Okay.
Was like that's, and then she needs time for just herself or for other partnerships, right? And they like that wasn't budgeable for either of them. Sometimes I work with people, it's like, all right, can you have 5 nights a week instead of 7? And you're like, actually, okay. And you realize it's a good thing because like there's things to do for yourself or with others. And this can happen in monogamy too, that expectation of all of your free time out of work is my time, right? That we feel entitled.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, can we, inch over to each other? Is it just too far apart and we're not going to be satisfied? And how we see relationships and time in relationship is just too fundamentally different.
Mm.
That
And
happens. Yeah.
yeah, sorry, go.
No, that's all. Just that it happens. Yeah.
What I was wondering as you were saying that is how do you know where to draw the line of we're not compatible versus this is something we can work on and we can be compatible?
Yeah, it's a great question too, because um, I feel like I'm still sorting through this with a lot of people. Like, what's a fundamental incompatibility versus what can be negotiated?
Right.
Yeah. And so I think it takes time. I think more my advice would be don't rush to it's a complete incompatibility without putting in like a good 6 months of work on that or more, right? To really see like, is there no way that we can negotiate this differently or like be creative and experiment with different ways? So phases of experimentation is what I usually recommend.
Right.
But I'll guide people through, do you actually want this or not? And how to get clear on that individually and then bring that to the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you see, you fundamentally just want different things and that's actually quite clear, then it's like, then it's clear, right?
Yeah.
Or, you've been articulating it for a long time and the partner just consistently won't show up, maybe says they want to but they actually don't follow through. Like, okay, yeah, at some point you have to say, I don't think this is changing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot about, allowing some space for experimentation and giving this a shot, taking the leap, investing in something that is uncertain, but
Yeah.
something that is also clear.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally different. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be surprising because sometimes deal breakers or like incompatibilities show up later in a relationship during new phases or new life experiences
Yeah.
where you were compatible actually for a long time and then suddenly you're not.
It's change. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that often happens when you have partners that have been monogamous and one is suddenly realizes, I'm polyamorous by orientation. This is fundamentally who and how I am. And the other partner has to face, can I be with that or not?
Mm.
Right?
Are
Can I
they?
do this or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think a lot about boundaries as well. You
Yeah.
know, like at what point, or perhaps a better question is, what can your experience with polyamory and relationships teach people about setting boundaries? Like, is there a framework or a protocol that you use for someone to help, or for someone to be able to develop the ability to set boundaries and know when to set a boundary?
Yeah. Yeah. Usually it's retrospective, is people notice when their boundaries have been crossed that they might have not even named. Right. So, and to see boundaries as like seeing them as a relationship, right? What is the level? What's the kind of experience? So not just that sometimes we can go a little too negative with boundaries, like this is what I don't want, and here's the line and never cross it. That's important. I don't
Yeah.
want people to not do that, but also to see, well, what is it actually that I'm wanting?
Hmm.
What am I actually advocating for, right? Or what's the invitation into what kind of experience or the request that I'm making into a certain kind of experience with my partner? Yeah, so it is an internal assessment process of knowing, what are my preferences, what are my limits, what are my deal breakers, right? And a lot of that we don't know until we experience it
Hmm.
as well. Like we can have some ideas, okay, I definitely know I don't want that and this, but sometimes it's not until we go through it that we realize, um, oh, that's absolutely a boundary for me, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So it's a lot about experiencing it first and then having the self-compassion to look at it, and then next time we could do something about it.
Yeah, yeah. But in non-monogamy, we often do need agreements and to feel like our boundaries are clear and that we've made requests about things that we need or what kind of communication that we need, what kind of, safe sex protocols we need. And if someone keeps not respecting those or violating those agreements and boundaries, yeah, we have to, really assess, is this working? What's going on there? Yeah.
Yeah. And is there a way that you recommend for people to set their boundaries? Like, how can you communicate that, make it clear to yourself and to the other person?
Yeah, I think talking in the language of needs and wants is usually going to be received better, even than saying these are my boundaries at this point, right? Because I think people hear that and they have a reaction, but or not making it as demands,
Yeah,
but I think really explaining this is what I need or this is what I want and why
yeah,
can really help to get your partner on board with understanding this is why I need this. This is what this kind of boundary offers us, right? So to even see the positive, what the boundary is giving to the connection or the relationship or the individual. And I
mm,
think when we get to that level of dialogue, it can really help people get on board with some of those, and honoring and really being curious about your partner's boundaries.
yeah.
Yeah,
Part of respecting your own boundaries is also having the empathy to respect other people's boundaries.
exactly. Yeah, the respect for it. And, in sort of the methodology of nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg makes a good distinction between strategies and needs. Right? So we might have like when we talk about our boundaries, what needs are actually there? And is this a strategy that actually could be a different strategy, right? Or is this like a fundamental need that we're hitting on?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're almost out of time, but I do have a couple more questions for you.
Great.
The one is about trauma because you're also a relationship and trauma expert. And
Mm.
so for someone who's sorting through trauma following something that's, happened to them in life or a breakup, what advice would you give them to process that trauma?
Yeah, definitely get help. And trauma is usually a multi-pronged approach,
Yeah.
support from people in your life, it's support with professionals. As I've said before, it can be many different kinds of professionals. I mean, you can do trauma therapy with a yoga therapist, yoga practitioner, with, assisted psychotherapy with ketamine or MDMA, with psychotherapy, right? There's lots of more trauma support groups that you can access online or in person that are free, right?
Yeah.
So just realizing that um, trauma, yeah, it's a multifaceted healing process, and that's okay.
Yeah. Sort of
Yeah,
accept that part as well.
yeah, exactly. And that we can make certain strides forward and then we kind of backslide. Like it's not a linear process either.
And it's kind of the same with anxious attachment too. It's not really a linear
Right.
process of becoming secure, but rather something that we slowly work on.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So seeing any of this healing work more as the marathon, not the sprint,
Mm,
you know.
yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome, Jessica. I also know that you have a new book coming up after Polysecure. Do you want to tell us more about it?
Yeah. Polywise. It's coming out the end of August. And as I say in the intro to the book, really thought it would be my first book.
Hmm.
And attachment as a struggle would be a chapter in this book. But then my publisher was like, "Can we do a whole book on attachment?" And I was like, "I'll try." So this sort of is the other five-ish things that I see outside, not just attachment challenges, but the other challenges that arise when people are living non-monogamously, right? And sort of supporting them through identifying those challenges and then what we can do to work on those challenges. So
Right.
that's the premise of the book. Yeah.
Nice. It's more of a practical guide for someone who's practicing non-monogamy.
And it's really meant to be for people not just in the beginning of opening up, but really the beginning of opening up, as well as people who are, have been doing this a long time. And it's about these transitions you go through, right?
Yeah.
So, of relationships changing, escalating, de-escalating, nesting, not nesting. That can happen years into partnerships that have been non-monogamous. But those transitions really can jostle a lot and expose a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great, thank you. There's a lot more personal anecdote too. I wrote my co-author on the book, David Cooley, we were married and opened up together. And so there's more stories in there about some of the hardships we went through.
Nice.
Yeah.
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 It's always cool to read the stories behind what brought all of this to light.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, thanks so much for the interview. It was really cool. I learned a lot. And yeah, if you have any final thoughts, feel free.
I think just reiterating for people that are struggling with anxious attachment, just that you're struggling with it. It's not all of you, right? Not to identify with it, and really to know that it can heal. And it doesn't mean that we never feel anxious or insecure again, right? But when you do, you have options and choice, instead of getting sort of so swept away by it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So focus on the process and take it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would say within every anxious is an avoidant, and within every avoidant is an anxious. And so once you find that opposite side within you, a lot can change on how you see yourself and others.
Right. That's a really cool way to end things in terms of giving you guys something to think about. And so yeah.
Yeah. What are you avoiding?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure.
You're welcome. All right. Have a good day.
So, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching this interview with Jessica Fern. Jessica is the author of best-selling book Polysecure, and she's also an expert on relationships, attachment, trauma, and polyamory. Now, while I am monogamous myself, I still find it useful to learn from different perspectives, and so I found the knowledge that Jessica shared with us today very valuable, and I hope you did as well. Now, if you feel like you are struggling with anxious attachment and you would like a little bit of help and support in working through it, then I would love for you to join our community, Love Addicts. We have a community of people with anxious attachment where you can share your situation and your story, and you can get direct feedback from the people in there, as well as the psychologists and coaches who are constantly monitoring the community and who can give you advice on your specific situation. We also have courses, and we have daily life sessions, and much more. So please join us. You can do that at loveaddicts.com. And if you liked this video and you would like to see more videos and interviews like this, then please subscribe to our channel. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.